Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Ayin Zayin, and we're starting at a Mishnah 1/3 of the way down. For much of this parak, we've been discussing animals that get mixed up or pieces of animals that get mixed up. Not It's somewhat graphic, but not overly graphic. We'll get into that tonight. Tonight is going to be a short blot, as are many of the blot for this week. If you take a look ahead, you'll see that Ayin Vav is relatively short. I'm sorry, Ayin Zayin is relatively short, Ayin Ches is short, Ayin Tetz is relatively short, and then his Pei is relatively short. So we have a couple of feels like Baba Basra after the Rashbam took over. So the happy days of Nizika. So Amir Hashem will continue to learn every night. As mentioned, I won't be here Wednesday night. I think I will be here the remainder of the nights. One other night is still unknown. So let's jump in. Again, we're 1/3 of the way down on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph at a new Mishnah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihye b'dvaro. The Mishnah says if there are evarei chatas shenisarvu be'evarei ola, there are limbs of a chatas which get mixed up with the limbs of an ola. Now, we've been through most of Shas. An ola is kulo lashem. The whole thing is kalil. It gets consumed. So what do you do? Like, you have an obligation to burn the whole ola. You're technically, under certain cases, allowed to eat certain parts of a chatas. What do you do? This is a machlokes tanaim. If you get these evarim mixed up, the evari chatas and the evari ola. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, yitein lamala, nunu, put everything up on the mizbeach. V'roe anias besar hachatas milamala ki'ilu hein eitzim. Now, it's not that you're not putting them up. You're putting them up, but you're calling it something else. It sounds shver. We'll see in the Gemara why it is that Rabbi Eliezer would support such an opinion. But if in fact there were evarei chatas that were mixed with evarei ola, we just put it all up on the mizbeach and we look at the evarei chatas as though they are eitzim. The Chachamim omrim tu'ubar tu rasan. This is a phrase that I know we've seen earlier in Shas, though I could never tell you where. We have seen it before, is that we kind of wait until morning when they're kind of puzzle, and then v'yatzu lebeis hasreifa, they get burnt, but not on the mizbeach. So machlokes tanaim asks the Gemara halfway down at the open of the Gemara in Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, my time of the Rabbi Eliezer. Why is it that Rabbi Eliezer allows for putting up the evarei chatas on top of the mizbech and calling it eitzim? Why would he allow for that? So says the Gemara, Omar Kra. We have a pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, Perek Beis, pasuk Yud Beis. The pasuk in full reads, Korban Reshis Takrivu Osam LaHashem Ve'el HaMizbeach Lo Ya'alu L'Reich Nichoach. And the quote of our Gemara is, Amar Kra, Ve'el HaMizbeach Lo Ya'alu L'Reich Nichoach. The Reich Nichoach Yata Ma'ale. In this case, when you have a mixture of evarei chatas and evarei ola, it's true that it won't go up as a reich nichoach, but you're still allowed to put the chatas on the mizbech of alatamale l'shem eitzim. So he makes a diuk from the pasuk. You're okay. What are you supposed to do? Nebuch, you have a mixture. So with this mixture, you're right. It doesn't go up as a reich nichoach because we did it wrong. We made a mistake. We weren't careful, and we have mixtures. And so therefore the Gemara says that what we should do is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, based on the pasuk, what do the Chachamim say about this pasuk? So the Gemara says that the Chachamim learn this pasuk totally differently. I didn't know what the pasuk Yud Aleph was before pasuk Yud Beis, but we need to know what that pasuk is beforehand because it talks about chametz and it talks about dvash. So it says the Gemara v'Rabbanan mi'et rachmana osam. If you look in our pasuk, it says korban reshis takrivu osam, referring to things in the previous pasuk of chametz and dvash. Osam hu de'iyat ma'aleh. Those things you're allowed to put up l'shem eitzim. Aval midi achrina lo. But nothing else can go up l'shem eitzim. If you want to put up chametz udvash and you want them to function as fuel, no problem. But, says the Rabbanan, the pasuk that you, Rabbi Eliezer, thinks is matir, putting the chatas up as eitzim, absolutely not, because the only thing that we can use as fuel, other than the wood itself, is chametz udvash, but not the meat of the chatas. Rabbi Eliezer, what do you do with the drasha of Osam? We just saw the drasha of Osam does not what you want. because that would cause a problem for you. So Rabbi Eliezer, you need to come up with a definition of what the word osam actually means. So he says 2/3 of the way down, Rabbi Eliezer, osam hu de revoy lecha kevesh k'mizbeach. This is an ancillary din as it relates to the mizbeach, that which is brought on the kebesh, which is brought up to the kebesh, can therefore by definition be brought up to the ramp. A very small technical ancillary rule, but that's what he learns the word osam means. And it has nothing to do with our case at all. I Rabbanon, where do they learn that din from? That the kevesh is like the mizbeach in regards to certain korbanos or certain things that are put on the kevesh, that they then can be transferred over to the mizbeach. He says, Rabbanon tarte shmamino. They can learn both from the same word. The word osam is a plural word. Other svaras as to why they should be able to learn it. Lemaisa, let's review. We saw in our Mishnah that if we have evari chata shenis arvu be'evari ola, Rabbi Eliezer was matir based on a diuk in the pasuk. The Chachamim said your diuk is wrong, and then they did a little shakla to figure out how each of the shitas deals with their counterparts psukim. Good. That brings us to the next part of our Gemara, Masnisin delo ki haitana. Our Mishnah is definitely not like the following Tana, the Tanya. We have a brisa it's an interesting note. If you look on the side in the Maseches Hashas, do you have that, David? So I have a note in the Maseches Hashas. It says Ke'ein ze lekamon pe'alef amid aleph. So what does that tell you? That the syntax of the brisa here is different than over there. It's not a perfect quote, but it doesn't consider it a separate brisa. So that's what the Gemara says, is that they are, again, it's somewhat similar. What does that brisa say over there on Pei Aleph? And why is it not like our Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Lo nechlaku Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim alevarei chata shenis arvu be'evarei ola sheikrevu. That which we said was the machlokas of our Mishnah, says this brisa, no, that is literally not the machlokas of our Mishnah. So obviously the author of the Mishnah, of the brisa on Pei Aleph, can't be the author of our Mishnah because they don't hold the machlokas as the same. But says the Gemara, so din number one is that they don't argue about our case. They hold that in our case, if Evari Chatas gets mixed up with Evari Ola, that Yikruvu. Din number two says the Gemara, Biroveya v'nirba shelo nikruvu. Yikruvu. That if an animal was roveya, it caused for the sodomy, the animal was roveya, a person, or v'nirba, or an animal was the victim of a bestiality from a human. In those cases, shelo yikruvu, they're not put up on the mizbech. Alma nechleku, according to this brisa, what then is the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim? The Gemara says 5 lines from the bottom, Al evare ola temima, shenis arvu be'evare bailas mum. He says that the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is about a very specific case. And their machlokes is about an ola temima, an ola that has no mum, that got mixed up with the limbs of an ola that does have a mum. So, remember our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, according to the author of our Mishnah, held that the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is about Evari Chatas that got mixed up with Evari Ola. The Brisa, who's clearly not like our Mishnah, he says there is a machlokas between them, but not like our Mishnah. Rather, the only machlokas is between the pieces of an Ola Tmima and the pieces of an Ola Bailas Mum. And here, what's the machlokas? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yikrivu. And what does he say in regards to the Evari Ola Tamima with the Evari Bailas Mum? Why are they Yikrivu? Because the Roe Ani Lemala Ki'ilu Heinetzim. I hold that the Evari Bailas Mum, even though they don't belong on the Mizbech, Pasnesh, it really doesn't belong there, but they're mixed. What are you supposed to do? Okay, din b'di'evet. Okay, so throw it up on the Mizbech. So he holds at Afalpi that the Ola Tamima is mixed with Ola Bailas Mum. You put it up on the Mizbech and it's Ki'ilu, it's Eitzim. So this, says the Gemara, is the machlokas of a different Tana. So we have a machlokas Tanaim about the machlokas Tanaim of Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim. In our Mishnah, the machlokas is about Evarei Chatas mixed with Evarei Ola. And in the Brisa from Pei Aleph, the machlokas Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim is about Ola Tamima. It's Evarei Ola Tamima mixed with Evarei Bailas Mum. So then the Gemara asks a clever question. I don't understand. But Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that we are allowed to put up the Evare Ola Balasmu, says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer, I don't understand. Why is it that the Brisa says, and you didn't argue, the Brisa from Pei Aleph, and we have it here 5-6 lines from the bottom, it says, animals that were involved in bestiality one way or the other, lo yikrivu. Why? De lo chazu. Oh yeah, bailas mum nami lo chazu. Okay, they're different averas, but lemaisa rovei v'nirba is not chazi for the Beis Hamikdash, not chazi for the Mishkan. Guess what? Neither is bailas mum. So why, Rabbi Eliezer, were you matir the case of bailas mum to be put on the mizbeach, but you weren't matir the case of rovei v'nirba? Pick one track, but don't be machalik between them. So says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Turning to the top of Ayin Zayin Amid Beis and heading to the Mishnah 4 lines from the bottom of the page on Ayin Zayin Amid Beis, says the Gemara, I agree with you. Really, when it comes to an animal that's a bailas mum, it's not chazi for the mizbeach either. Just one low-level type of mum is shaykh for the mizbeach. What's that? Ravuna bedukin sheba'ayin. Some type of mum that has to do with the eye of the animal. This shita of Rabbi Eliezer, that we don't allow for Oveh and Nirba because they're not chazi, but we do allow for the Evare Ola, that is a bailas mum, to be put on the mizbech. That's not talking about every mum. It's only talking about a mum of Beduk and Sheba'ain, which is a very low-level mum, and only according to Rabbi Akiva, who holds that if this mum was imalu lo yerd. So says the Gemara, if that's true, and if you look carefully at the language on the second line of Rabbi Akiva, of Im Alu Lo Yerdu, Eimar de Amar Rabbi Akiva de Avad. When do we say that you are allowed to keep the Evare Ola of a bailas mum of B'dukim Sheba'ayin? When do we say that can stay up on the Mizbech? That's only a din dievet. Lechatchila mi Amar. Would Rabbi Akiva agree to that? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Rav Papa Hacha b'Maya Skinan Kigon Sha'alu al Gabe Kevesh. What we're talking about is when it wasn't yet put up on the Mizbech. Rabbi Akiva was talking about a case where this animal, the Evare bailas mum of an Ola, was put on the Kevesh, and as Rashi highlights, because it was put on the Kevesh, it can then be moved. Rashi, Dibur Hamaschil. I think I put my mark in the wrong place here. There you go. On the second line of the page, because Rabbi Akiva holds that if an animal with bedukin sheba'ayin, it has that mum, was put up on the mizbech, it can't be taken down. Hani ma'alon lechatchila mikevesh the mizbech. Once it's put on the kevesh, then lechatchila you can move it to the mizbech. But you're right, had it not been put on the kevesh, we wouldn't have moved it. The kaiman on the kaman kshim sham mizbech mekadesh kacha kevesh mekadesh. Because since, and this is a very interesting din, because the kevesh has a similar-ish din of kedusha. Remember that we said that the kevesh had a space, again a minute, let's call it a centimeter. There was a little bit of space between the end of the kevesh as it met the ramp. It wasn't fused to the ramp. We needed the blood to have airspace vertically over the floor, and the Evarim as well that were thrown over. So therefore, the Gemara says that what are we talking about? The case that we're talking about is where the kevesh, where the animal, let's just be very specific. The case that we're dealing with is Evare Ola, that was Balas Mum. The Mum was B'dukin Sheba Ayin, and it was already put on the kevesh. In that case, from there, L'chatchila, you can move it over to the Mizbech. Very, very, very specific ukimta. Says the Gemara, Ihachi. If that's what we're talking about, this very specific ukimta, where the kevesh, where the animal with the bedukin sheba'ayin was put on the kevesh, why do we need the case that we were dealing with, that it's a mixture of ola tamima with ola ba'alas mum? After all, ihachi afilu be'enaihu. Even if the animal was all by its lonesome, even if the whole animal was there, that would have been allowed. So what mixture? Pashut, it would be true with a mixture. So therefore the Gemara pivots 6 lines from the top of the page on Ayin Zayin Amid Beis. Elatamid Rabbi Eliezer is for a different reason. Why is it that Rabbi Eliezer is matir a case of a vare ola tamima with a vare ola bailas mum to be put on the mizbech and considered to be eitzim? Says the Gemara, because the state in the pasuk, Elatamid Rabbi Eliezer miet rachmana mum bam. Let's look at the pasuk. The pasuk says in Vayikra Chaf Beis Chaf Hey, Umiyad ben nechar lo sakrivu es lechem elokechem mikol ele ki moshchasam bahem mum bam lo yeratzu lachem. There's a mum in it. So back in the Gemara, mum bam hu de lo yeratzu. When there's just that mum, that's when it's not wanted. But ha'al yudei ta'aroves yeratzu. The mixture is allowed. That's when we're allowed to put it up on the mizbeach as eitzim, only when it's a mixture. So says the Gemara, the reason why Rabbi Eliezer is matir putting up the mixture of a vare ola tamima with a vare ola ba'alas mum is because of a drasha in a pasuk. The Rabbanon. What do the rabbis do with this pasuk? The Rabbanon say 6-7 lines down. The Rabbanon mum bam hu de lo yeratzu ha'avar mum bam yeratzu. They say, Rabbi Eliezer, you made the wrong diuk. What it means is that if there's a mum, there's a lo yeratzu. What's the diuk? That if the mum goes away, that it's yeratzu. Not that you can put it up mixed. You learn mum bam the wrong way. So they have a machlokes how to understand the words mum bam. Rabbi Eliezer, where do you learn the din that if it's avar mum bam yeratzu, because you didn't learn mum bam that way? Says the Gemara, mi bam bahem. The fact that there's two words. Mum bam, and it also says bahem. So he says, because of that extra word, I, Rabbi Eliezer, am able to learn the din that avar mum bam yeratzu. So basically, let's just go back to get a clarity before we move on here. Rabbi Eliezer's reason for being matir, the mixture of a vare ola tamima with a vare ola balas mum, is from the pasuk of mum bam. The Rabbanan learn it to teach that if the mum was over, if the mum goes away, that it's allowed. Rabbi Eliezer learned that from bam bahem. The Rabbanan bam bahem lo darshin. So we're able to see how Rabbi Eliezer got to his shita. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Rabbi Eliezer holds, based on what we just learned, is that there's a direct drasha from the pasuk in Vayikra Chaf Beis that's matir. Mum bam hu de lo yeratze ha yedei taroves yeratzu. That's clear, that if there's a tarovish, you're allowed to put it up. So ask the Gemara, that we have such an explicit drasha, then the language of our brisa is weird. Why did you say roeh? If you look back at the drasha on the bottom of Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph, and remember this brisa was the one that is ke'ein zeh l'kaman on Daf Pei Aleph. Look at what Rabbi Eliezer said. Yeah, go ahead. Put it up on the mizbeach. 3 lines from the bottom. What does he say? The roe ani lemala keilu hein. Why? Why are you saying that it's keilu hein eitzim? Your drasha that you just learned says it's just mutter. Don't give me a mashal. Don't compare it to eitzim. It's just mutter. So why the weird language of roe ani when it's just yikravu? It's just mutter. I don't need you to compare it to eitzim. The drasha says mumbam. And if it's going to be a ta'aroves, no problem. I don't need your weird language. So the Gemara says, Yihachi roeh harachmana achsherei. We have a straight drasha that's matir, putting up a ta'aroves on the mizbeach. This ta'aroves of ola, of evare ola tamima, with evare ola bailas. Says the Gemara, oh, you're absolutely right. You misread it. Really, says the Gemara, L'divrehem ka'amar lahu. Rabbi Eliezer was pushing on the Chachamim. What was he saying? Lididi rachmana achsherei. I don't need your help. I don't need to compare this to eitzim. I'm good. I have a straight up drasha. Rachmana achsherei. And according to me, Rabbi Eliezer, I could put that on the mizbeach without even blinking. I have a drasha. But lididchu, according to you who don't learn the pasuk of mum bam this way, Oduli miha that besar balas mum ke'etzim dami. Worst case scenario. You're not masking with my drasha. At least admit that when I put it up there, that it's considered like eitzim. Midi dehave abasar chatas. No different than our Mishnah that we have on Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph that we started with today. The Rabbanon, they say no, you can't put that up on the mizbeach. Hacha, in the case that we're dealing with, where the balmum me'isi. It's ma'us to put a balmum on the mizbeach. You made a ta'aroves. Nebuch on you. I'm not putting that on the mizbeach. It's pasnish. You don't put a mizbeach that's a balmum up there. So that's me'isi. So that's why the Chachamim don't allow to put up the animal. Even in a mixture, we don't allow the Balmum. But Hasam in the Mishnah on Ayin Zayin with Aleph that's talking about a chatas, oh, you mixed up a chatas and ola? Yeah, but lo me'isi. That's not disgusting. You just mixed up things that don't belong in the Mizbech. But they're both Givaldik. They're both Karbanos. There's no mum in the chatas. It's just a chatas and an ola. You mix them up. And the ola should all be kalil. And the chatas, okay, put it all in the Mizbech. I'm maskim, say the Chachamim. They agree, but not by Balmum. So there's a fundamental machlokes here. There's a fundamental machlokes between the way Rabbi Eliezer views the case of Balmum and the way the Chachamim view it. The Rabbi Eliezer says Rachmana Achshra, he has a pasuk mum bam, and he makes the drasha to say that a tarubas can be put up there, no problem at all. The Chachamim say, how can you even think like that? It's ma'us. You can't put a Balmum up on the Mizbeah. So they have this fundamental machlokes of how do we view mum bam? How do we view the pasuk mum bam? And then more broadly, how do we view something that's a Balmum? Good. Next Mishnah, halfway down, just a few more minutes of learning, stopping at the final Mishnah on the page. Evarin, regular Evarin, be'evarin ba'alei mumin. So we should expect to have a very similar discussion, right? So this, Rashi says, take a look at Rashi. Rashi is 10 lines from the top of the page. Dibar maschel masnisen Evarim, Evarim shel olos harbe be'evare olas bailas mum. What's fascinating about this? This is exactly like the brisa that we just spent time on, the brisa from Pei Aleph. But it goes to show you that the author of our Mishnah certainly does not learn like that brisa, just like we argued in the previous Mishnah. So let's learn this within that frame, because the brisa and the last 15 minutes of learning that we just spent on trying to understand the machlokas of Allah and Chachamim doesn't really apply here. Let's see how things are learned over here. So we have an ola, we have regular evarim that are mixed with evarim balimum. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, if one head of the mixed animals was put up there, we can assume that the Balmum was put up there, and therefore all the other ones can be Yikru Kol HaRoshen. And the same thing, the legs of one of them was put up, we can assume that the one that you put up was the Balmum, and therefore Yikru Kol HaKaran. Then all of the other legs can be put up. I'm not having it because they are concerned, as we saw earlier, that perhaps it's a Balmum, and a Balmum does not belong. It's Me'isi. It doesn't belong on the Mizbeach. So just a couple of lines here. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Lo hikshe Rabbi Eliezer ela shnaim shnaim. Only if things are put up in pairs, because then only one animal was Balmum. At least we're certain that some Balmum was put there. Aval echad echad lo. But if it's put up one at a time, even Rabbi Eliezer, this is not the pashtus of our Mishnah, but that is what the Gemara says is a possibility. Masiv Rav Yirmiyah, this can't possibly be that it says Amar Rabbi Elazar lo hikshe Rabbi Eliezer, right? So the Amora of Rabbi Elazar has to be wrong, says the Gemara. Masiv Rabbi Yirmiyah against Rabbi Elazar, who posited that Rabbi Eliezer couldn't have meant echad echad, it has to be shtaim shtaim. How can you say that? What did the Chachamim say back to Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah? The Chachamim omrim kirvu kulan chutz me'echad mehen yatzel beis hasreifa. Chutz me'echad mehen. What does that show? It's not in pairs. It's one at a time. So Amar lo Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa responds. That looks like an interesting thing here. Amar le Rabbi Yaakov le Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Rabbi Yaakov says to Rabbi Yirmiyah, no. Azber alach my echad. When it says echad, it means zug echad. Yeah, so it's still possible that Rabbi Eliezer, the Amora, is right, that Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, is only talking about shtaim shtaim and not echad echad. We'll stop right here at the Mishnah, 4 lines from the bottom of Ayin Zayin and Beis, and Amir Hashem will pick up tomorrow night with Daf Ayin Ches. Wishing you all a beautiful night.